When it comes to buying an investment property, most people obsess over the property and not the actual process in buying an investment property. So in other words, they chase hotspots, they don't define their strategy, and they're not really market-ready buyers. And as a result, they completely overanalyze. They get pulled by fads and opinions from Instagram ads and cherry-picked case studies. And they end up buying nothing or the complete wrong thing. And so buying an investment property is a structured process. And when executed properly, you're going to buy the right one. Hi, I'm Cory and I'm founder of Propsavvy. My team buy up to $60 million in property per year in Adelaide. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact process that I use every single day to help clients buy their first investment property, starting with defining your goals. Now, I know this might seem a bit wishy-washy and I won't spend a huge amount of time on this topic, but it is so important and really crucial. It's pretty much foundational to the entire process. As you go further into your investment journey, the more money you have, the more distractions come up. In other words, you have more options. So it's really important to be very clear about what it is we're trying to achieve and what is the path we're going to use to get there. So step one is to set out your 1, 2, 3, 5, and even 10-year goals. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to get cash flow? Are you trying to build equity? Being very clear about that from the very beginning determines which property and property type you're going to buy. In other words, they all require different strategies. So once you're clear on what you're trying to achieve, whether it's 10 properties in 10 years and you want capital growth, then you know which areas, or you start to get clear about which areas you're looking for and what property types you're looking for. So you can start to reverse engineer that goal based on your income, your serviceability, and your starting capital. Now, if you get this right, you don't get distracted by other things. You get really clear and you focus and you sleep at night knowing that all your actions are taking you towards your end goal, which then allows you to go into step 2, which is one of the most important steps of this entire process, and that is getting market ready. Now, there are 2 things that you need to do to get market ready. Number 1 is that you need to have your finance ready to go. Number 2 is that you need to have a clear brief. Where you're buying, what you're buying, and how much we're willing to pay. Let's go through part 1, which is the finance. You need to be aligned with a very good mortgage broker. I much prefer working with a broker than going straight to the bank because a broker has access to multiple lenders. Now, you've already established what your goal is. Let's just say, for example, you want to buy 10 properties in 10 years and capital growth is your goal. You need to align yourself with the right broker that understands how to do it. Either they've done it themselves or they're helped with many other clients to do the same. Not every broker is the same. Some brokers are very good at understanding policy and which banks and which structures to use at which time that allow you to get to that servicing, and which will actually hinder you and stop you from getting to that 3rd or 4th property. Very important. In other words, the broker will help you plan your portfolio. Can you buy the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th? I always say to my clients, when you're buying one property, you're not buying one, you're actually buying 2 at the same time. In other words, if I buy this one, can I borrow and buy the 2nd one? The other thing you need to consider is, do you need to buy in a structure? Now, a good person to consult for this is also an accountant. Do you need to buy in a company? Do you need to buy in a trust? Or could you start out in your personal name? The lenders look at debt differently depending on the structure that is held in. And depending also if you're a business owner or if you're an employee, there are tax implications between choosing the right structure as well. So really important to consult with a very good accountant alongside your broker. And what you're actually doing right now, getting market ready, you're building your A team. Now, when you've got a big goal, it's not something that you can do by yourself. You need to surround yourself with the right people to support you on the tax, legal side, as well as the finance side. I'll go through the A team a little bit later when it comes to the actual property side and due diligence. And so what we're doing is we're getting you market ready and pre-approved from the finance side of things. Now, some clients, I don't usually recommend that they need to go full pre-approval to start looking for property, but at least have those chats and even have those structures set up just so that you're not scrambling last minute when putting through offers on properties and signing contracts. Part 2 of getting market ready is having that clear brief. So one of the things you need to ask yourself, do you want to be an active investor or do you want to be a passive investor? 2 very completely different things. Let me give you an example. Active investor is someone that's willing to be active in the process. In other words, you're buying something purposely to renovate or subdivide. You're actively doing something to the property to increase its value and then holding on to it. A passive investor is someone that basically buys, holds, sets, and forgets. typically someone that is quite low risk tolerant and also quite busy with their job or business. So if you're an active investor, typically you're someone that could be quite aggressive, or you have an experience in the construction industry, whether you've got experience building granny flats or extending the property or renovating the property. So in other words, your choice really depends on your risk profile as well as your goals. This then allows you to get a clear understanding of what kind of property you're looking for. Which brings us to the next stage, which is suburb selection. This is where things start to get exciting. And as you probably have noticed, we haven't even opened up realestate.com or talked about specific properties yet. So there's a lot of back work that's required to get your market ready. And this part's very exciting because now you're starting to get clear about where we're going to buy. Okay, so what I always recommend is start with your home city first. There are markets within markets. For example, in Adelaide, what's happening in Enfield is completely different to what's happening in Aldinga Beach. All right, there are markets within markets. So I always prefer start with your own state first because it feels familiar and it feels like you can actually get a grasp of what's happening in that suburb or that area a lot quicker than, say, a state that you've never been to. So the steps to this process is pick a state, which could be your home state, and then start narrowing it down to the council. Once you've done that, then you can start going towards the suburb selection, and we go deeper and deeper. Now, ultimately, your budget is going to dictate which suburbs you're going to pick. So if your budget for your first property is, say, $700,000, you're not going to go into a suburb where the average price for a property is $1 million. So that's going to be your first filter when doing suburb selection. Now, when it comes to choosing the suburb, I use tools like hashtag.com.au and stashproperty.com.au. The links to those tools are in the bio, but those are really, really good tools to get a clear understanding of which suburbs and the data that's looking really good for future capital growth. We're looking at supply and demand data, and future supply going down, meaning there's less properties coming up the market, and is those suburbs selling quicker and quicker over the time. So in other words, you want a suburb that is starting to grow because the days on market are dropping and also the stock on market is dropping as well. We also want to look at vacancy rates. Is the suburb that you're selecting have, 15, 20, 30, 40 different rentals available on realestate.com? That's a really good indicator if the market there is too saturated with investors and you're going to have to compete getting a tenant. The other thing you'll look at as well is future building approvals. Is there going to be a massive amount of stock coming up? Because you want to buy in an area that has a lack of future supply. You want a scarcity of properties. But ultimately, one of the things that you can do with these tools, you can actually see which pockets sell for more and which pockets sell for less. Stash property is a really good example for doing that. So you can understand which pockets are more desirable than others. Now, there is no better way of knowing all this than actually speaking to the people on the ground. I always recommend speaking to at least 5 or 10 different selling agents, as well as rental managers in the area to get an understanding of what people are looking for, what is hot right now, what's selling, what's required, what's in demand from a rental perspective, and what kind of people are buying these properties as well. Another thing that I do in a suburb is I do a comparable sales analysis. I always go to the sold section of realestate.com and I basically list out all the properties that have sold, the price, the block size, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms. I basically become an area expert. I want to see what moves the needle. Is there a price difference between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, or 3-bedroom and a 4-bedroom? There are some suburbs, there are about 200 grand difference between 3 and 4-bedroom. It's really clear and important to be an area expert. And so I knew, for example, when I started out, that in Enfield, the top part of Enfield always sold less than the bottom part of Enfield. And so this is really crucial information because you can really determine whether you're overpaying or not in a suburb, and you become an area expert. Now, if you're buying in a really hot market, something else I do is I always call the agent where the property says that it's under offer. Now, if the contract has gone unconditional, the selling agent can give you an indication of what that property sold for as well. So just to recap, you're basically choosing an area based on data using tools like hashtag and stashproperty.com.au. You're also picking the council and the suburbs that fit within your budget, and you're becoming an area expert in those areas as you drill down in that order, which then leads to the fun part, which is finding the property and putting through an offer, which is where everyone wants to get to. So now we're at the stage where you can actually do that. And so we're going to understand there's two different types of property. There's on market and off market. On market listings is obviously stuff that you see on realestate.com and domain.com.au. Off market listings are basically properties that are not on those platforms. And there's actually different types of off-market properties. There's off-markets where no one knows about it and you do, and then off-market properties where they've emailed their database but they haven't officially launched it on the website. And the ones that you get the most leverage from are the ones that are truly off-market, where there's no one involved, which then means that you have a lot less competition for that property. Now, the only way to get off-market properties is if you build and establish good relationships. There's no point calling an agent and going, "Hi, do you have any off-market properties for me so I can make a good deal?" They're just going to laugh at you and they're going to think, "Who do you think I work for? I work for the seller. I want to get the best outcome from the seller, not for you." So what you understand is that relationships is currency in this market. You need to establish relationships, and it could be just going through that market research stage that you've built a rapport with the agent over the phone or in person. If you can make it on person, it's a little bit easier. You're going to opens and you're just saying, "Hey, I'm not ready to buy yet, but I'm actually just here just to get a market research before I become ready." And as you start to see the same agent multiple times, you start to build naturally a relationship, and if you start trying to build a conversation with them. So this is really, really important. You have to build a conversation and you have to let them know that you're actually ready. You've got your pre-approval, you've got your structure set up, you know exactly what you want, you know the budget, you know the area. And so what can happen is that sometimes you might get an off-market property where it's a distressed seller. Perhaps they need to sell because they have financial difficulty. Perhaps they need to sell because they need someone more flexible. They need a longer settlement. They need help finding another house, and they want someone that wants a rent back, which means they get a guaranteed rental when they sell the property to you, so they become homeless because they're struggling to find a home. There are lots of different reasons why people sell off market, but it does give you an opportunity to get a good deal. And so the only way to do that is to build relationships. It requires work, guys. And that's why someone like me is so busy, because I've built the relationships over many, many years, which allows me to get these really good deals off market. Now, when you found a property, it's time to put through an offer. And so the reason why I bring it up in this step is because a lot of people get this wrong. It is really, really important to fill the offer correctly. So some of the things that people get mixed up is, one, they miss out any middle names in the offer form. Now, the contract of sale needs to have your full legal name, and banks really don't like it when there's missing names. So they fill that out, but that's not really going to affect you getting the property or not. It just makes the admin process a little bit easier. But the things that selling agents are looking for is obviously your offer amount, your deposit, and also your any terms and conditions, as well as your finance conditions. Let's start with the offer. Now, obviously the offer amount is something that, depending on how the agent works, they usually most likely come back to you to get a little bit more. You've done your research, you know what things are worth, you've got comparable sales, okay? So you know if you're under market, or if you're on market, or if you're overpaying. So make sure you have those handy and you put through the offer. I always like to start with something that's actually going to be based on the conversation that you've had prior. So I wouldn't start with the highest price, of course. Next part is the deposit. Now, this is a thing that doesn't cost you much to do, but in Adelaide, the maximum deposit they would accept is around 5% of the purchase price. So if you go in with a deposit of 5 or 10 grand, they're just thinking that you're not serious. So make sure you put a good, decent deposit there. You're going to need it anyway, but it just shows that you're keen and that you've got skin in the game in this property. Next is your settlement period. So I always ask, what kind of settlement period does the seller want? That's as simple as that. Like, do they need a long settlement, quick settlement, medium settlement? This helps you uncover why they're selling, but also it just matches with what they're looking for. It's not always the fastest they're looking for. Sometimes people need time if there's a family involved. Next is your finance terms. Now, if you're going subject to finance or going unconditional, up to you on that, but you must have your broker details filled out correctly in there. Name, phone number is the minimum, email address is an absolute bonus as well. Now, if you fill out subject to finance, but you don't put your broker's details in there, that just gives them a big red flag. So you make sure you have those details ready, along with your conveyancer details as well. Now, when it comes to subject to finance in Adelaide, it's usually 1 to 2 weeks for subject to finance. 2 weeks is pretty standard for finance for approval. This means that if you don't get finance, you can get out of the contract and you don't lose your deposit. Now, some people do get properties without subject to finance, so go straight to unconditional, but I highly recommend getting your broker's blessing on that as well. There is quite a bit of risk doing that, because if you don't get finance, you have to follow through with the property, which means you could lose your deposit if you don't settle. And that brings us to the next step. Once you've secured the property, you've got it under contract, Now it's time to do further due diligence. So one of the things that you'll do in Adelaide, you've got a 2-day cooling off period, 2 full clear business days, which means that you can change your mind and cancel the contract and you haven't even paid the deposit yet. During that time, that's when I do the building and pest. Most agents won't accept subject to building and pest just because the market that we're in, there's just too many buyers and not enough property, which means they don't really like to have those terms, which is a little bit too risky for the seller. So in Adelaide, I always do the building and pest during the 2-day cooling off period, and I do recommend getting someone prior to you making offers on property so you have that person ready and on your A team. Now, the goal for the building and pest inspection is to look for major structural issues and termites. Okay, so those are the 2 main things that you're looking for. You've obviously inspected the property, you've looked at the property, you've tested things, you've checked that the taps are working and that the plumbing is not blocked, or however best you can. The building and pest inspector will find maintenance stuff that needs to be fixed, little stuff before you put it on the rental market. But really, you're looking for major structural issues and termites, and if there are, you're in your cooling off period, which allows you to call off and cancel the contract. Which then brings us to step 6, which is you are now got the property under contract, you've paid your deposit, and your finance has been approved. We're waiting for settlement. Now, one of the things I do here is I also start lining up a rental manager. Now, the selling agent typically tries to refer you to their selling agent, and it's totally up to you if you want to do that, but you've also done your research. You've spoken to other rental managers. You know who's good, who was there to help you, and who wasn't really an expert in the area. So you've already got a few that you could work with. I always recommend getting those lined up before settlement so that they're ready on the day or the next day of settlement, and start the process for advertising for getting tenant if the actual property is currently vacant. Now, the rental manager is also really good at recommendations in terms of what potential little improvements you can do to the property. Sometimes a house needs a good paint, sometimes it needs a little bit of a clean, sometimes there's a bit of handyman work that needs to be done, and sometimes there might be a little bit of landscaping. But your rental manager is your point of contact in making sure that these get done. So that's the process. It's not about finding the perfect property from the very beginning. It's about following a proven process that gets you the right property for your goals and what you're trying to achieve. Now, if you want my team to help you finding this, if you want my team to apply this exact framework and helping you build your portfolio and buy that first or second property, build your brief, find the property and negotiate the deal, that's what we do at Propsavvy. So the link is in the description below to book a call.